Great. On a means of introduction, just very briefly, my name's George Ristau. I'm the managing broker at Weichert Realtors All Pro. The name of our show is Ask the Managing Broker, and as the managing broker of our company, we're reaching out to our own agents today and also any of our other individuals that are following us, trying to provide some good information. One disclaimer up front: if you're from another office or just listening in today, we always recommend that you check with your own managing broker before making any kind of decisions transactionally. Every company has different policies, and of course our scenarios here are to follow the state of Illinois licensing laws completely and fully, but again, there's different interpretations that can happen along the way. So always consult with your managing broker, and your managing broker should also consult with your corporate attorney just to make sure that you're doing everything appropriately as you move forward with your real estate career. Gino, you have a question?
Hi, George. What are some examples of retention gifts you've given to your clients over the years?
Sure. One of the things that we've been involved with the company is in planning our marketing strategies over the years. We've tried to incorporate regular connections with our existing clients. Many times over that time frame, we've changed up. We've done some things on a seasonal basis. We've also done many other promotions to try to thank our clients for all of the opportunities that they've given us to work with, not only with them, but also for the referrals that they've sent us. Certainly, just a nice thank you is probably the best thing that you can do. A follow-up thank you note is certainly always appropriate. Gifts have some level of limitation with not only the state of Illinois on some gifting items, but also with the IRS. So again, you always want to comply with whatever your interpretation is of those requirements. For us, typically we've invited clients to many thank you events over the years. Day at the Races has been a popular one that we've done in the past. Our movie event has attracted throngs of individuals, hopefully based mostly on our invitation, but bottom line, the value of the movie itself and the interest in the movie is always one of the major factors in attendance. But it's not so much just attendance; it's really extending that opportunity to those clients to participate with us in a community event. Most recently, just within the last couple of weeks, we participated in the St. Baldrick's event, which was hosted at the site in Park Ridge, Harp and Fiddle, raised over $100,000 of total monies for pediatric cancer, and was a great success. So we jumped in on that, this being our first year in operation at the Park Ridge location, and that worked out well. So just a variety of different things, whatever seems appropriate. Seasonal items, great around Christmas time, and just throughout the year, Easter gifts, summer gifts, those types of things have all been received very well by our clients over the years.
What are some examples of things the IRS might have a problem with?
Just from the perspective of us, you want to make sure that you are staying within the limitations. If you decide you're going to use this and write that off as an expense of your business, then there's only a certain amount of money that you can write off with the IRS, and you should consult with your accountant on it. Otherwise, no issues. Of course, no incentives can be given to a client for a referral. The license law prohibits an individual from gifting or a so-called gift to an individual, or giving them any kind of remuneration or other consideration on that for sending you a referral. So really, a nice thank you is always the safest and the most appropriate way to handle that scenario.
Are you allowed to give cash back to your client after you close?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gino. scenarios for reimbursement to a client is not an issue these days because it's your own client. So whatever transaction you work out monetarily with them, whether it's in a reduced fee scenario or whether you represent them, say, in a purchase, and then you reimburse them a portion of that fee, that's fully permitted under licensed law. Full disclosure, of course, is important. You'd have to make sure that if a lender is involved, there could be a situation where that may impact the transaction. So again, full disclosure is there. But really, when we're talking about compensation, we're talking about to a third party, to an outsider rather than your own client. So no real significant issues on your own client reimbursement or adjustment. That's just the marketplace scenario, and the deal gets made, and then again, you abide by whatever agreement you made with the client and go forward. Again, same thing. Hate to couch it always, but it's always a good thing to double check, on any type of arrangement that you might have, again, with your managing broker and also with your attorney to make sure that it stands scrutiny and you don't put yourself in any type of a risk position with that.
Fair enough. So another question here. It's a marketing question.
Good. We are in the marketing business, so we always like to have marketing questions. Yes, Gino.
If an agent has a relationship with a local small business, what are some ways that agent can partner with that business in order to promote their business?
One of the things that you can do is if you have vendor relationships, and one of the benefits of that is to try to work with individuals that might be able to make recommendations of your services there, and that could be often the trades are really a good source for that opportunity, and that could be, for example, working with the local plumber, the local carpenter, the local electrician, painter, landscaper. These are all great sources because we are in the business of helping people buy homes and selling homes for individuals, and certainly those other individuals are also in the same business, generally speaking. So encouraging them to refer your services out is certainly a great approach to the business. And likewise, you can refer those individuals out when you have a need or when the seller has a need for that. Some of my best relationships that I've established over the years have been with the trades people that I happen to work with during the home buying process or the home selling process. And one of the things as an experienced agent that you bring with you when you represent a seller or a buyer is that arsenal of different individuals that you've worked with over the years, and you try to always be able to have a bag that's full of the answers that are there because you never know what need is going to arise. I just had a property that I sold, and we had an environmental need that arose, so I had to reach out to my environmental individual that I work with on a potential asbestos issue, which turned out to be a non-issue down the road. But only by having that individual available could we address it quickly and then rule it out as a potential challenge for the sale of the property. So again, that's just a small or single example there. And the more you have available in your bag to be able to reach into, then you're going to be in a position where you can do a better job for your clients.
How would an agent go about targeting for sale by owner leads?
Well, there's the for sale by owner is one of the many different target markets that many realtors will look at and approach. And there are pros and cons of trying to work with for sale by owners on it. One of the good things from working with a for sale by owner is that you get to meet people and you get to try to address their challenges, and it keeps your skills sharp there because they're going to have certain reasons why they're trying to sell for sale by owner. What are those reasons? They could be various reasons. Sometimes they don't want to share their information maybe with a broker. Second, sometimes individuals want to be selling their home more in a quiet fashion, so they think that selling as a for sale by owner might give them a better opportunity to control the relationship there or to make the sale. Oftentimes that for sale by owner has had some level of sales experience along the way, so they may feel that they can do just what the real estate broker does, and they don't have to pay for it. Bottom line on it is usually a monetary scenario that the for sale by owner oftentimes thinks they're going to save the commission. The commission could be 5%, 6% of the total transaction. And in fact, they may be in a position occasionally to be able to save that commission and net more dollars. The reality, though, is that statistics show, I believe, studies that have been done over the years, is that over 80 to 90% of the time, the for sale by owner actually nets less dollars in a for sale by owner scenario rather than working with a real estate broker. And why is that the case? And I firmly believe in this. If I had a property to sell and I wasn't ably suited to sell it myself, even though I'm a broker with over 35 years experience in the business, in the past I've had no issues with having additional brokers with certain specialties represent me. And that would be the same scenarios that if you're an attorney, then oftentimes you will hire another attorney to represent you. This puts you really as a broker or the attorney scenario into a position where you're representing your client's interest. You're listening. That third party broker is listening objectively and can give you better advice. And he's not going to be as tied in to the emotions that might lurk as you are attempting to potentially sell your own property there. In the for sale by owner scenario, just back to marketing, when you're talking to that for sale by owner, you have to explain the benefits of working with a broker, the benefits of the company that you're working with, and also your own personal benefits that you bring to the table, which will put, again, that broker in a position that they develop a relationship with the client, and they eventually have the client's trust, and they can represent them as they move forward.
When an owner chooses to sell on their own, do they still have to pay the co-op commission?
Yeah, well, a lot of times they see the gross number, which again could be a negotiable. We should always state that commissions are completely negotiable between the parties. That would be between the seller and the brokerage company. But using an example of, say, 5% to 6% of the transaction, if it was a 6% transaction, they see the 6% number, they do their calculations. $200,000 sale, 6%, $12,000. I can save the $12,000, and I don't have to pay anybody, and I can do it better myself. So that's the thinking from that perspective. The reality is that oftentimes they will decide to work with a cooperating broker. If they pay the cooperating broker a fee of 2.5% to 3%, there's half of their theoretical savings that's just gone away. So now your savings might have been cut from $12,000 to $6,000. And now you're in a position, again, probably strategy-wise with the for sale by owner, the most difficult thing that the for sale by owner will encounter along the way. And they usually are out for, unless they're really hardcore for sale by owner, usually within a 30-day period, they've pretty much decided that if I can't sell it in a certain period of time, they will eventually list with a broker on it. But the challenge that the for sale by owner has is always a question in the back of their mind, or at least it should be, do I really have the benefits that of full exposure for my property? And in a scenario where we have potentially as many as 60 to 70,000 real estate brokers in our MLS, they can have that army of individuals working on their behalf to produce a ready, willing, and able buyer. Or they can be really fairly isolated and try to sell on their own, or even the most sophisticated ones possibly post it on one or two sites and get some exposure. But do you really know that you're getting the best buyer that's out there when you're only dealing with a fraction of the potential exposure for the property? So that's probably the largest benefit that we have as brokers, that we can get maximum exposure very quickly for a seller on trying to sell their property.
What are closing cost credits, and how can they affect the purchase price?
Sure. Closing cost credits, that's a very familiar question. I'm always explaining that to sellers when we sit down. I'm working with buyers on it. From the buyer perspective, let's start there. The buyer may want to make a purchase but have a limited amount of dollars available for a down payment and also for closing costs available. And that's just part of the necessary evil of purchasing real estate, is that it's going to cost some money and someone has to pay for that along the way. In that same example that we just discussed before, say the $200,000 sale, if a buyer works with an FHA purchase, they're going to typically need about 3.5% down, and that's about $7,000 for the down payment. In addition to that, they're going to have an expense of closing costs, which could be total dollars somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 to say $7,000 on it, or around 3% of the purchase price. So let's say that buyer then on that $200,000 purchase has great credit or good credit, at least enough to be able to get them over whatever the threshold is. And then they're in a position where they have that down payment, they have the $7,000, $8,000 in the bank, but and the ability to buy because their jobs are solid jobs. However, at that point, they're still short because they don't have the extra $6,000 or $7,000 for the closing costs. Or they might need that money or want to hold on to that money to do some renovations of the property once they get inside. And what's the way that we overcome that? The way that we overcome that is that if we're representing the purchaser, then we go to that seller eventually when we prepare an offer on behalf of the purchaser, and we ask that seller, hey, can we get a closing cost credit in the amount of X amount of dollars? And again, the typical threshold of around 3%, we ask the seller to contribute $6,000 at the time of closing, and then that, in essence, covers the buyer for their closing costs. So two options. Buyer has $7,000 under that scenario and gets $6,000 back from the seller at closing, or the buyer has $13,000 or $14,000 that they need to close the deal. On an economic basis, purely looking at it, there's a lot more individuals that are out there that have $7,000 than have $14,000, and therefore that's why the closing cost credit has become a very popular tool to get first-time buyers, especially into properties along the way. Now, one of the pitfalls to watch out for, though, in the closing cost credit is to remember that the property must appraise out at the top number. So whatever the negotiated price is on it, so let's say it's that $200,000 example, and let's say that the client offers the $200,000 and asks for a 3% credit. So the net dollars in that transaction then turn out to be $194,000 net dollars to the seller. So that's their real money that they're getting because, again, they're subsidizing that purchase by adding in or giving at the time of the closing to the buyer that $6,000. So ultimately, the seller's real number on a $200,000 offer is $194,000, and if that's an acceptable offer to the seller, then they move forward with the individual transaction. The property, however, must appraise at that top number again. So if the property is artificially boosted in price to cover the closing cost credit, that may be a trip hazard that you would encounter 3 or 4 weeks into the transaction when it actually becomes time for that financing portion of the deal to be completed.
Fair enough. But at the end of the day, it's just another tool that we can use to get the deal done in certain circumstances.
Absolutely, and it's a very practical tool because it is fully permitted under all lending guidelines. Again, it needs to be fully disclosed so everyone, including the lender, knows exactly what's going on with the transaction, and it's become very, very commonplace of late as we proceed with getting our transactions done, with a higher percentage of transactions over the last several years being low down payment transactions. That's one of the things that's been driving the lower end of the marketplace, is to get qualified individuals in, get them the opportunity to own a home early in the game, take advantage of the not only the tax write-offs but the long-term appreciation that's out there in the marketplace. And certainly this is one of the tools that that many successful realtors have used along the way. You just have to make sure, again, that you know the potential pitfalls and that you're working with a real strong lender relationship so that the pre-approval letter that you might have has worked that into the transaction, and no surprises late in the game, all of this done up front. Now you can be on firm ground when you go to the seller if you're representing the buyer, and you can feel assured that you're going to be able to put together whatever you're putting down on paper.
All right, moving along. Another question here.
Good. Seems like a really good response for our first show, Gino.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Okay.
We got plenty going on here in the comment section.
What is an escalation clause, and when might you use it?
An escalation clause is a clause that's really come into play in the last 5 to 10 years in the marketplace. And in essence, what it says is that, well, if a broker submits that, they'll say, well, my offer is this amount of dollars. However, I will increase my offer by X amount of dollars over another bid or another offer, and my client is really interested in the property. So there are pluses and minuses with escalation clauses. Some offices use them extensively. Other offices use them in a much more limited fashion. My personal opinion is that I'm obviously an old school guy, and I've done business without the escalation clause. It probably has its place when you're trying to represent a buyer and get a deal done. From the listing perspective, as a broker that sees offers that come in that may have escalation clauses, it does create some issues along the way, because you could have multiple offers that come in also carrying escalation clauses, and now the scenarios are, well, my offer, I'll pay this amount over the price. The other party says, I'll pay this amount over the price. It's a moving target, sometimes much more difficult to define. It does create potentially some appraisal issues down the road in an overbidding situation, because you may commit to someone with an escalation clause, and then later the pricing gets somewhat over where real value is, and that could create a problem at a later point. So there's some issues then with escalation clauses that can pop up along the way. They do have their role. One of the challenges that I have with escalation clauses is the privacy aspects of the transaction, because many times the escalation clause requires the broker to submit the offer from another party to verify, in fact, so we'll pay more, but you have to prove it to us that you have another contract there. To me, that creates certain potential privacy issues that could be there, because I don't know completely if I have the authorization to release all of that information, along the line. So don't want to really brush through that, but always good to check in with your managing broker. On this one, you probably need your corporate attorney's opinion on it to make sure that if you put that in, you're handling it again in the proper fashion along the way.
What is the role of the title company in a real estate transaction?
Sure. The title company, as you look at your form contract on it, and when I started in this business, we had, if you can believe it, one-page contracts on it. Today we have, in our 7.0 contract, 13 pages. So buried within those 13 pages, you'll see a reference to title, and it's typically in the state of Illinois, the seller's requirement to provide clear title at the time of the closing. That would be good and merchantable title, which means that they have to be able to deliver title that does not have liens on the property, does not have any judgments, does not have any other challenges that would affect the individual's ability to own this property. And so what the title company does, and again, it's probably a good question, and I might be a little more in detail here than typical, is as many of my brokers that work in our company know, that my background is a legal background, and I had legal training and did attend law school and did practice law, specifically in the real estate field quite a few years ago, but had the opportunity to represent buyers and sellers in that time frame. So these are the kind of questions that I used to get all the time at the closing table. And on the title side, flipping back to your earlier question, ultimately the title company itself will insure that title. So let's say that along the line, the title, that there was some defect, that there was a fraudulent deed, or that the chain of title going back 25 years, where 3 transactions ago there was some issue, and then someone from the past comes forward and says, we have an issue, and we don't believe that we have clear title, and if it's found that it was not conveyed in a proper fashion, then the title company is the one that has to step up and may have to pay off the claim. So you're buying insurance just like you'd be buying homeowners insurance in the event of a storm. This would be a storm that would be a storm in the title that was there. On the costs of the title insurance, typically the seller pays the cost because they are insuring that title, and there are very many title companies, several title companies in Illinois, and they all do a great job in completing the transaction. This is where you go for the closing. If you're the buyer, your attorney representing the seller will provide the clearance for the items that need to be taken off the books, let's say, or removed prior to the closing. They'll pay off the liens and then make sure any judgments that could be out there are taken away. And then eventually the buyer gets clean title at that point, and they'll get a title insurance policy which insures their title along the way. And they'll pay the costs of insuring their lender. So you might see the lender name pop up on a lender policy. So the seller, again, is in a position where they represent or where they pay the costs. The bulk of the costs are paid by the seller, but the buyer has some costs for title also.
What are some of the tax advantages to home ownership?
Yes, I can, but I probably will decline to do that because again, in a real estate transaction, we always have to know what our role is. And I had just mentioned briefly, in the last question that while I may have legal training, I'm not the attorney typically on a normal transaction. I'm the broker, or I'm the managing broker with supervisory control over the brokers that work in our environment, in our company. So the most important thing is to know what your role is. And my role is the real estate broker. Bottom line, I'm putting transactions together, or our brokers are putting transactions together, representing the buyer and the seller. When we start to get into the question about tax advantages, there are tax advantages, certainly, because there's the ability to deduct a portion of or deduct the real estate taxes. Now there's a new limit under the most recent legislation with some caps that affect how much of the real estate taxes you can write off. The interest can still be written off. This would be the mortgage interest that you would pay with some caps also. And for most individuals that are in the very moderate price ranges, 200, 300, 400,000, they're going to get some substantial tax benefits from that. If they itemize their return, they'll be in a position that they can take some adjustments off of their gross income and then reduce that gross income to a lower amount and then pay a lower percentage on their taxes. Ultimately, though, and the reason why I was in a position that I pull back on any tax question. So each one of the individuals that you represent as an individual broker in the transaction will have their own specific scenarios. So as you become very general in discussion, that's great. But when you get into the specifics, it's always the safest way to approach it is to ask them to go back to their accountant, the one that prepares their taxes, and make sure that whatever impact this purchase is going to have on them is going to be specific to their needs and not just general in nature. Sometimes there's things that happen along the way, and individuals do not get the complete benefit that they were thinking they were going to get, and we don't want to put ourselves in a liability position as brokers. So again, there's a tremendous number of great accountants out there, CPAs and other professionals that can specifically render an opinion, and they'll be working with that client, so they'll be the ones that will be responsible later in preparing that tax return for them. So on the tax question, I'd flip it over there. Very similarly, on the legal question, if you're the broker on the transaction and you're asked for your opinion on a legal matter, even though, as I mentioned before, I've got that background, I'm always going to defer to the attorney representing the client. So if it's the buyer, let's let the buyer's attorney render his or her opinion. Let's let the seller's attorney render his or her opinion, because they're going to know more of the specifics, and they may also very objectively be approaching this question from a different perspective than you're looking at as the broker in the transaction. So again, hopefully that's specific enough to make sure that no one puts themselves in a jeopardy position. Risk control is really important, and just knowing what your role is probably the most significant part of the real estate transaction from the brokerage perspective.
All right, well, I've definitely had enough.
You've had enough?
I've had enough.
Good.
Too much info for me.
Good. Well, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do this again. And one of the key things that we again like to do today and ask the managing broker is to be around our new agents, and we've had over 25 new individual agents. I know many of them are listening in today. We appreciate you stopping in today. We're always around for your phone call. We'll always give you our opinion. But in the meantime, this is a great way to reach out to all of you with questions. If you listen to the show on a regular basis, I'm sure you're going to be picking up some new ideas along the way, and that's our goal in putting this production together. So thanks again for listening today. We truly appreciate that.